On today's Palace of Pistons podcast, the Pistons draft Ron Holland and Quentin Grimes no more. He's traded to the Dallas Mavericks for Tim Hardaway Jr. We talk about all that and more on this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing.
Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
All right, the NBA draft is done, and we're here to discuss it. Tim Forkin with me. Tim, stepping into a big role today with no Mike Angelano, no Jasper Epperling on the podcast today. So really, really excited to hear your thoughts. It's a different perspective from what our listeners usually get to hear, but you've also been on the podcast a little bit more lately. So can't wait to start talking with you. Before we get into it, let's do a quick ad read for our weekly sponsor, BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season, from baseball, golf, soccer, right to all the top fights in the UFC and MMA, as well as boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use our promo code BLEAV, BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Bet online, the game starts here. All right, so let's get right into the NBA draft. I'm not even going to waste time telling people to take 30 seconds and go to palaceofpistons.com and subscribe for free. Won't even waste the time telling them to do that, and that the link to do that is in the episode description on whatever platform that they're listening or watching on. But let's get to the Pistons, who shocked everyone on NBA draft night, making the first move that I think was probably against the grain, according to most experts and most mock drafts heading into the draft. So 1 through 4 probably went as 95% of the people expected it to. Zachary Richelet goes 1, Alex Sarr goes 2 to the Wizards, Reed Shepherd to the Rockets at 3, and then Stephon Castle goes to the Spurs at 4. But then the Pistons, they go off the beaten path and select Ron Holland, a 6'8" wing that last year played for the G League Ignite, was previously recruited and committed to Texas, but decommitted from there and opted to play for the Ignite in what was the Ignite's final season as a franchise. Tim, I guess first things first, like, what was your instant reaction to that? I think everyone was surprised. I think some people were pleasantly surprised. I think in the moment, a lot of people were maybe more so negatively surprised by the selection at 5.
Yeah, I was definitely shocked. First of all, shout out to Mike and Jasper for holding the pod down every week. They do a great job. We don't need them today, just to make it clear. We don't need them for me to be here. And I will hopefully do great in their absence. But Ron Holland, I saw it come through on Twitter right before I saw it on the screen. There was a lot more time, and maybe it's just because we're Pistons people, but there's a lot more time in between the 4th and 5th pick and the first 4 picks. So I'm thinking there's got to be a trade coming. Sounds like there's going to be a trade coming. I mean, inside the media room, it sounded like there was a considerable amount of shuffling going on, as if something seismic was about to happen. Then it comes across my phone. The Pistons have selected Ron Holland, and my first thought was, dang, I really was hoping it was Donovan Clingan. That was my first reaction. I thought that, I mean, we'll talk about the other moves that need to be made with this roster, but Clingan would have filled the need as a rim protecting center. Seeing Holland come through, it's kind of like, okay, I need to actually, this was a weaker draft class. I needed to recalibrate my expectations. And with Holland being mocked so late, he wasn't a guy that I fully dove into. As the night went on, maybe it's Pistons fan cope, maybe it's just like a better understanding of what Langdon's philosophy is. But I warmed up to it. I think Holland as a project prospect, I mean, the Pistons have presented that they might be taking their time. We've also heard things that they need to start winning now, for reasons obvious to some. So, uh, I think all in all, with Holland being on the roster, it gives the Pistons an extended timeline to see what he can be. He could be an impact player right away. He could have just had a terrible year with the Ignite, which is, by all accounts, like not entirely the best, like well-run organization. In a sense, folded. But he feels the need on the wing. All the stuff about him, like being raw, in the same way that like Jaylen Brown was raw, was very intriguing to me. And I see a world, um, if we take the blinders off of what the Pistons have done in the previous two drafts, I think by himself, Holland has the potential to be an impact player on the wing. You can mold him into whatever way you want. He can be an improving shooter. He's a good defender. He's very athletic. And there's just a lot of like room for him to be an impactful player. So I warmed up to it. I ended up liking it, even though I didn't love it at first.
Let me stop you there for a second. So Ron Holland was one of the many players in this year's draft class that was at one point the projected number one pick in the draft.
Yep.
He was the number two player in the country coming out of high school behind Isaiah Collier, who went, what, 29th in the first round? Or was it a little bit earlier? I don't remember exactly. But that being the point being, a top player going into his season with the G League Ignite ends up going 5, which was much higher than many anticipated. And I think the first reaction, at least to me, was why didn't they trade back if they wanted?
Yep.
Would there have been a world where he wasn't there at 9 had they made a move with Memphis, who very seemingly was actively trying to move up to draft Donovan Clingan? Could they have made a deal with Portland? Now, I think that deal got a little bit trickier when Portland traded before the draft for Denny Advia. But that being said, it just felt like the Pistons could have moved back and gotten Ron Holland at 9, at 10, at 11. It didn't seem like he was a top 10 prospect. That being said, I'm not totally opposed to Trajan Langdon, the new president of basketball operations, going out there and getting his guys, because he's very much following suit in what Troy Weaver did when he took over as the team's general manager and getting his guys. And we're going to see that process play out throughout the rest of the offseason. But I think that was the initial reaction, at least on my end, and I feel many felt that way as well. Why didn't they trade back? It seemed like there were certainly suitors to do so, but they didn't end up doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I would also, that was like the last, when I fell asleep and I'm hugging my pillow, happy that the draft came. It's like my favorite day of the year. That was like the last thing I thought of before I went to bed that night is I really think we still could have gotten him. The Pistons still could have gotten him at 9. Um, but I looked at the Grizzlies roster and I like, they're not giving up Vince Williams or Gigi Jackson to move up 4 spots. I don't love Marcus Smart as a like he's worth taking up cap space for. Like he would instill great defense and is an inconsistent shooter. But I just like that's not a salary I want to take on in this current like situation. And we'll get to the other semi-major move the Pist like medium-sized move the Pistons have made related to that. I like when teams have conviction and the way that everything's been presented around the Holland pick. Maybe he would have been there. Maybe if the trade was constructed around future assets, which the Grizzlies likely weren't willing to give up, and that's probably the sticking point in that deal. And Langdon also mentioned that the phone calls kind of dried up once they were actually on the clock. Maybe other teams realized that the Pistons were going to ask for too much, or they had assets they didn't want to part with. And I mean, Charlotte had to have felt the same because they didn't take Memphis's offer to move back as well. So if you're staying at 5 and you only have one real shot at the pick, and they had Holland highest on their board of players remaining, then I think like this was their plan for longer. And overall, like going back to the pick, the last thing I'll say about him specifically is um, we need to recalibrate our expectations of like what the roster is because taking a more proven player at that point or a rim protecting center at that point doesn't like it doesn't sound like it was of the utmost importance to get in the draft. The draft it sounded like the most important thing was to get a guy who they can develop for 4 years, who they can utilize their new shooting coach and Fred Vincent to help. And it forces me to think that the timeline once again is being extended. Now, we can't blame anyone but the previous regime for that. Like, you would not blame a president of basketball operations shaping a new roster that he inherited in his own image. So, if Holland was the guy for that, then I think that's if that's the route they're taking, then I think they should stick to the route they're taking and get veterans and other young players that make fill up the asset cupboard as we move forward.
You're right. And Langdon's made it very clear that this is going to take some time. That he said it at his introductory press conference. He reinforced it with this draft pick on Wednesday night. I was very clear in who I liked heading into this draft. I very much so thought Detroit should have taken Dalton Connect at 5. He ended up falling all the way to 17 to literally a perfect spot for him in Los Angeles. But let's delve into Holland a little bit here because he wasn't talked about as much as a target for Detroit at 5. So if you're not following the NBA draft as a whole and you just kind of cared about the Pistons in a vacuum, Ron Holland very much so caught you as a surprise on Wednesday night. Again, played for the G League Ignite last year, 18 years old, a 6'8 guard wing hybrid, 20 points a game, little under 7 rebounds, just under 3 assists, and the steals, the blocks, the defensive capability that he has is probably his most translatable asset right now as he enters the NBA, as well as his transition offense. Over 3 stocks per game between steals and blocks, and can really, really finish with athleticism, really, really quick, can get up in the air, a menace in transition. But the big concerns, right? Shooting, 24% from the 3-point line last year with the Ignite. I'm not a huge fan of a shooting form. A lot of guys nowadays, it's like, shooting forms are all pretty similar at this point. Holland's concerns me a little bit, and obviously the percentage backs up that concern. But it's something that Trajan Langdon said 20 minutes after, 30 minutes after he drafted him was, this is why they brought assistant coach, developmental coach Fred Vincent in. And they are very clearly confident in drafting these players and bringing in these players and keeping these players that maybe have a shaky 3-point shot right now, outside shot right now, because they feel Fred Vincent is capable of developing them. And they have the other skills that this front office values and wants to build around. So I wrote about Holland before the draft, during the process. He was one of the 3 players that I said Detroit should have stayed away from going into the draft. And I'm not going to say my mind is totally flipped on that. I still think there were better options for the Pistons at 5. I think my mind would have flipped a lot more so had they traded back and taken Holland. But that's really what Holland is. Anything else that you wanted to add on him there, Tim?
I think it shows like with Holland specifically, he was like consensus top 5 high school recruiting ranking. Um, that's like an important piece here is I think many teams and scouts might have been throwing this Ignite season out the window for him and Puzelis in a way that us fans or media or anyone would think so. Like you kind of see Holland's almost like what seemed as if empty calories production in the Ignite. There were many reports that Holland was sliding down the board. There were many reports that like it wasn't it wasn't really going to happen for Holland to be the number 1 pick as it was initially seeming as he was coming out of high school. Holland is very much one of those like hoop mixtape style, crazy athleticism, like touted up prospects coming out of high school. And I think NBA teams, well, what I learned is NBA teams care about that a lot. I wouldn't blame Langdon for seeing what happened in the Ignite, seeing that he had an insanely high usage rate for someone who's not a traditional like initiator point guard type. He basically was playing point guard for the Ignite. For Langdon to see that and say like this guy got buckets, he played good defense, and the situation just wasn't helpful for him. Like you could put him into any way that the Pistons roster shakes out, and he's probably vying for rotation minutes. He's not going to be starting day one. Um, and knowing all of that, with the with so much hope that the Pistons are going to do something else with their cap space and with trades and with the young players on the roster to um, bring Holland up in a situation that makes sense for him. Um, that high recruiting ranking and his role on the team just like I'm giving this pick and this situation more leeway than I initially would have. I would have liked Klingon at 5. I've loved Connect. I mean, Aaron, you and I connected on loving him so early on in the process. Um, all in all, like what also would not have been the pick I would have made. I would have taken a trade back almost in any scenario, um, except for like taking on salary you don't like Marcus Smart, at least that I didn't want. But overall, I'm maybe it's fan brain, maybe it's cope. I've grown to be okay with the pick. I'm just very excited for what's next.
Well, the Pistons didn't stop there making selections. They also drafted Bobi Klintman at 37. This was a move that was made possible by trading up with the Minnesota Timberwolves in what was basically a salary dump for them. The Pistons got 37 and guard Wendell Moore, who has very sparsely played NBA minutes throughout 2 years of his career, for the 53rd pick that Detroit had in the second round. Bobi Klintman, not a guy that I knew a ton about going into the draft, and a guy that I know only a little bit more about afterwards, just after doing some general, film watching and looking at scouting reports and whatnot. But kind of fits the Langdon mold, right? Taking these long wings with athleticism, betting on the three-point shooting to develop, and trying to turn these guys into players that can give you minutes on the wing, as that's very much how he likes to build out his teams and the prospects that he gravitates toward. One other point I'll make here real quick is I thought it was interesting because Langdon did not draft a college player, and to me it seems like he didn't really value the college game this past season. Not saying that's a good or bad thing, but just based off the way that he spoke, he talked about how the G League Ignite, the guys that Ron Holland was playing on a nightly basis, those were, older, better players, better athletes than the guys in college were playing. And I think he would likely say the same thing for Bobi Klintman, who was playing over in the NBL in Australia.
Yeah, that's a good point to make. I was thinking the same thing. I mean, Dyson Daniels was a recent lottery pick for him as well in New Orleans, sorry. Um, I got trades on my brain. But yeah, the Klintman pick doesn't come as a surprise when you see the frame, you see the youth, you see like he seems to be a bit more far along as a shooter, still not like a guarantee that a player that young comes in and can shoot the ball. Um, I like it. I'm very curious to see what the role that Klintman plays in this first season. Is he strictly a G League guy? Is he someone who actually can get minutes? I think the interesting point about Holland and Klintman is that these are both players who, when predicting like previous, like Klintman like declared and withdrew from the previous draft and had like a top 20 grade uh last season, like being even more raw. So he comes back and he goes like early second round. It's very interesting to me to see like him and Holland are both guys that other scouts and other maybe even teams were thinking of higher in the past. I think these are two players that Langdon or his staff in particular had been holding on to for quite some time, just because like these were the names to know in previous years. Um, it kind of like reinforces that this is a guy. He might not be like, I mean, Tom Gore said Troy Weaver loved basketball. He loved the court and all that stuff. Now, he also said that about Langdon with all the other intangibles of being a CEO. But I think Langdon, more than it's been let on, like is a tape grinder. I think he is a guy who locks in on these certain guys that fit his mold, and he went and got two guys that fit his mold. And the the if this is a sign for things to come, the Pistons will have an identity on both sides of the ball. That might be too like big of a jump to make with just two draft picks. I don't think it is. I think he has a way that he likes his draft picks to come. He has a way that he likes his guards to play, which I very much hope is Cade. He has a way that he likes his bigs. Um, and it will be very refreshing if these draft picks are a sign that there is an identity coming down the pipe for the Pistons. Now we'll see what the rest of the roster turns out to be. If he acquires more players who fit this mold of big players who hopefully project as scorers and um, actually play defense. Troy Weaver once said that the Pistons won't be the Pistons until they start playing defense. He also didn't do anything to help them start playing defense. But this identity bodes well for guys on the roster like Asar Thompson, Cade Cunningham, Ron Holland, and I think like Klintman to an extent. Like there's an identity that's forming that I'd love to see more of.
Klintman's interesting to me because his mock was all over the board. I mean, some had him graded as a first round prospect, some had him graded as a late 40s prospect.
Mm-hmm.
A draft outlet that I really, really respect and I would encourage everyone to check out is if you're a Pistons fan, you're watching a team and following a team that's at the top of the draft each and every year. No ceilings. In their last mock draft heading into the draft, they had Klintman at 49. So wide variance there. And to me, that says this is a pick, especially considering the case that Detroit traded up to do this. They're really convinced on this guy. And look, who knows what this upcoming season has in store for the Pistons, but early indications say that it's going to be a losing season. It's going to be a developmental season. Like Clement's going to get some opportunity both in the NBA and potentially in the G League with the Crews to really prove that this was worth maybe a quote unquote reach for Langdon. I don't know. It's not that big of a deal. It's a second round pick in what's considered to be an incredibly weak draft class, but he's an interesting prospect. 6'10", a little bit older than the average draft prospect, I guess, at 21. I mean, Ron Holland's 18. It's not like Klintman is a veteran by any stretch of the imagination, but the way people talked about Dalton Connect, who's 23, you'd think he's, on the back end of his prime and on the sunset of his career. But he's an interesting player. And at a 6'10" forward now, certainly going to need to put on some weight, some muscle. I mean, he's listed at 210, like needs to add some size if he's going to defend and bang with these other athletes in the NBA that are, 6'7", 6'8", and are 240. Like there's a lot of development that's going to have to happen with this guy. But again, as you start to see how Langdon wants to build out his roster, just looking at the profile of a guy like Klintman, I'm intrigued. And during what's bound to be another losing season, I'm intrigued what his minutes will look like and what his developmental path will look like. Tim, anything else on the NBA draft before we move on?
No, I mean, that's a perfect segue. Like the one thing Klintman has semi-proven, at least more than Ron Holland, is his ability to shoot. And that's like the last remaining question for me on the roster. I obviously care about what happens like in trades and like free agency, but the overarching thing is like how do the Pistons get more shooting? And as of this morning, it seems like they're on the path to doing that in various forms. So I'm excited to hear where you take this.
Yeah, so the Pistons make a trade post-draft in what has been a incredibly divisive decision in the online Pistons community. The Pistons made a deal with the Dallas Mavericks, acquiring Tim Hardaway Jr., the Toronto Raptors 2025 second-round pick, and two 2028 second-round picks in exchange for Quinton Grimes. Now, the reaction online, I'll say it's probably 70-30. People do not like this move for Detroit.
Come on.
There's a lot of Quinton Grimes supporters out there. And a lot of people that think very, very highly of Quentin Grimes, who played just 6 games for Detroit, came to the Pistons battling knee issues and ended the season battling knee issues. Grimes played in 6 games Shot 21% from the field, 14% from the three-point line. Again, very short, small sample size. So let's not judge those numbers too significantly. Was a 36% three-point shooter with the Knicks this past season before getting dealt to Detroit. Tim, a very divisive trade. I like Tim Hardaway Jr. He has been rumored to be he's been rumored in trade talks with the Pistons dating back to the Stan Van Gundy era. I remember being told there were very, very hot rumors that Tim Hardaway Jr. was going to be dealt by the Knicks to Detroit in a deal for Brandon Jennings. So that's a very, very long time ago. And he's been in trade rumors with the Pistons literally ever since. This felt like a prophecy finally being accomplished, finally being achieved. I am a fan of bringing in a three-point shooter, a guy that averaged 14 points per game last season, has been a very, very consistent microwave type scorer, a guy that can get hot, and a guy that can just space the floor for a team that has so many guys that it's going to really take some time to develop their shooting. They needed to get floor spacers, and Tim Hardaway Jr. accomplishes that. I guess my question is, like, how heartbroken are you that Quinton Grimes is no longer a Detroit Piston? I think if you read the reaction online, you'd think this guy was, the starting shooting guard of the future and a potential all-star.
I am not surprised to see the reaction to the Quentin Grimes trade. You want to know why I'm not surprised? Because we are very simple people as Pistons fans, and Quentin Grimes is cool. He's cool. He's a cool player. He's a cool guy. And to let that guy go for someone who we've seen play inconsistently on a finals team, nonetheless, like it's just there's other things going on besides the 6 games, like seeing the 6 games of this player. I think Quentin Grimes is a cool player, young player with some hope, some defense, makes threes. This is what I want to talk about in regards to this trade. Like Quentin Grimes, I'll say it one more time. Pistons fans are being attached to a player who played 6 games in Pistons red, white, or white, blue, and black. Like I don't understand the attachment. If you're going to add a guy who made, let me do some quick math here. I hate doing math live. The number one Pistons player who made the most threes last season was Jaden Ivey. He made 124 threes in 77 games. Tim Hardaway Jr. made 211 threes. So that's like 90 more threes. I'm not going to do the exact how many it is exactly. Maybe Aaron can do it in the background. But you added a guy who made 90 more threes this season than any player on the Pistons roster, just in a vacuum. And I actually, like, if I'm being like self-aware, I care a lot about three-point shooting. It's kind of like the stat that I go to for most players. I really think if you can't shoot or you don't make enough shots, like, you are going to lose games. That's why the Pistons have lost games. I mean, I could look at other teams here, but Tim Hardaway Jr. made nearly 100, I think it's like 85 or something, 85, 90 more threes than the player on the Pistons who made the most for them. That in a vacuum tells me this is a valuable addition. He isn't that great of a defender. He's on a 1-year contract. He takes 60 million away from what else they could have done. In a vacuum, the need has been Cade needs shooters around him, not only in percentage, but in attempts. On those, let me pull up one more time. On those 212 three-point makes, that's almost 600 attempts, 597 attempts. That's 35%. It's not like it's a little bit above league average, not incredible, but those makes, like, you cannot replace those makes. So the Pistons added a guy who can make 200 threes in a year. He's done it 4 times, all of them being in the past 5 seasons, except for 2022, when he only played 42 games. So I wouldn't say I'm over the moon, but these are the kinds of moves that the Pistons need to make. Trajan Langdon has said shooting is the number one need on this team. Let's go get a guy who made 200 threes last year. Is he a perfect player? No. Is he a helpful player specifically for the skill that the Pistons lack? Yes. And I'd like to see this. I'd like to see them do this 1 or 2 more times to make the roster make sense. So that's the Grimes attachment doesn't make sense to me. And like just because he's cool doesn't mean like he's going to be an awesome player, especially not here. We also know it isn't like a rumor. Like we know that he wasn't a fan of being in Detroit. Maybe a little bit of an injury didn't make him so excited to come back into the lineup. When we know that and we know what the Pistons got in addition to 3 second round picks, I think this is a no-brainer deal. I'll say it one more time. 200 threes. I won't look it up, but there's no
100
Pistons
less
basically
in
yeah.
100. So it's look, the fascination with Grimes. I wasn't against keeping Quentin Grimes, by the way. Like, be very clear, there's no agenda here. I thought Quentin Grimes was a fine young player, and I thought if you wanted to keep him, that's a-okay. I had him penciled into Detroit's rotation before this move. But let's also look at some facts. Fred Vincent's not going to have a damn second of free time as soon as the Pistons start coming in for work. Look at how many guys need attention from him in developing their outside jump shot. And Quentin Grimes was included in that list too. The guy did not have a great 3-point shooting season last year. Ron Holland, Jaden Ivey, Asar Thompson, Isaiah Stewart. If there's any plans for Jalen Duren to expand his range, I think Kate Cunningham certainly could use it as well. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Bobi Klintman. There's a million guys that are going to need Fred Vincent's time. And if you could maybe move off a rotation player, an 8th to 10th man, and get a veteran and get future assets for this guy, why doesn't that make sense? One other point I'll make here is that Toronto 2025 second-round pick is probably going to be pretty damn valuable. Toronto's not going to be a good team. They're going to be towards the bottom of the league in record. That's going to be a low 30s second-round pick, and it'll get dubbed as a pseudo first-round pick in a 2025 draft class that's being talked about as being potentially generational. It's really, really good. You get 2 other second-round picks in the deal. You know what you use all those second-round picks for? You put them together to move up for a first-round pick. You attach them with a player to help get you another first-round pick. This isn't a Trajan Langdon wants to get 12 second-round picks and just throw darts at a board and see what sticks. This is part of a very clear plan if you're listening and you're understanding what's been said by him and by reputable sources since Langdon's come aboard. So I don't think there's too much more that needs to really be said about that deal. I think it's very sentimental with the way people feel about Grimes. And unfortunately for those people, Grimes did not feel the same way about you and the Detroit Pistons. It did not take very long to get to Twitter and share his excitement about being moved to Dallas. So yeah, Langdon did a good thing. And I might talk about this at another point in time. But why is everyone so quick to judge all of the moves that Langdon is making? I very, very clearly remember the previous general manager, the previous lead executive, being given immense praise for everything that he did in his first at least 2 years with the team. There was, Troy Weaver has a plan. Let him execute his plan. He's building out his roster the way he sees it. Where is that with Langdon? I get it. The Pistons just wasted another 4 years of your life, and that can be frustrating. But you have to give this guy time, and you have to give this guy a chance, because everyone was celebrating 3 weeks ago when Langdon was announced as the new president of basketball operations.
Yep.
Everyone reacted like the Pistons just got this incredible executive. And now, after a couple draft picks and 2 trades, everyone's jumping ship already. People were ready to give Troy Weaver a whole nother season with this team to figure things out. Incredible change in reaction and an incredible change in understanding from my point of view. I just think that's remarkable. I get the anxiety. I get the desire to want to win. But let's also be real here. We're talking about Langdon moving a role player for a role player and getting some additional assets back in the deal. I don't see how you say this doesn't make sense for Detroit.
Yeah. I mean, can we talk about the difference between this trade and the Bojan Bogdanovic like Burks trade that got Quentin Grimes into the Pistons? Like from trading Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks, two veterans who were willing to shoot the ball. I the makes part like kind of fell off for them. We're willing to shoot the ball. The the return on trading both of them was like after this Grimes trade and after we know probably Malachi Flynn, uh, Ryan Arcidiacono already isn't on the Pistons anymore. Um, Evan Fournier's option will be declined. We know that the return from that trade was 5 second-round picks and a 50-point game from Malachi Flynn that all of us will remember in infamy. Like that's all we got for a
I'd like to think
player.
that ever happened personally.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that I won't don't want to remember it in me. I just want to forget it. Can I get like
yep.
my blacks? Can I just get it erased from my memory?
No player has ever looked like a street ball video game character than Malachi Flynn. I digress. Um, that's the return for two players who it was reported other teams were willing to offer first round picks for at different times. So we went from a president who or a GM who made decisions based on what might happen in the future versus a president who is looking to add shooting to the roster now. Can I remind everyone that Quinton Grimes, like, if we're worried about his shooting, he made 157 threes in the 2023 season. In this past season, I had it pulled in front of me. He made 4 threes for the Pistons in those 6 games. And in the past season, he made 81 and only shot 240. So all this talk about, oh, he's going to be a shooter, just wait till he's healthy. He is still never eclipsed Tim Hardaway Jr. or even sniffed his attempts, right? If shooting is the number one thing that we're tracking, then this wasn't a player that we was going to help us in this.
Let me just compound on that real quick because you talked about the final tally in terms of what Detroit got in for trading off of Bogdanovich and Alec Burks. And you said 5 second-round picks. And you know what 5 second-round picks gets you in the NBA nowadays? 4 or 5 second-round picks get you a first-round draft pick on draft night. That allows you to move up into the first round if there's someone that you like. So, yeah, that's valuable. Like, you want to be mad that this team didn't get a straight-on first-round pick back in that deal? Like, well, that goes back to a lot of people's guy, Troy Weaver. That goes back to him. That's not on Langdon anymore. Langdon can't fix that. He can only do with what he has available to him. And for a guy that, again, eighth, ninth, 10th man, it's the best they were going to probably get. And let's look at the reality of, at least for now, with the guys on the roster, Jaden Ivey's a developmental priority over Quentin Grimes. Asar Thompson's a developmental priority over Quentin Grimes. Ron Holland is a developmental priority over Quentin Grimes. Factor in the fact that they need some veterans to play on the wing. There really wasn't going to be some massive, massive role for Quentin Grimes. Hate to break it to you.
100% agree. Like this is like Stockholm syndrome. Basically, it's like, why are we getting attached to these players who have not done anything in a Pistons uniform? Makes no sense at all. I rue the day that someone is like, but the Pistons have to keep Bobi Klintman. Like they have to keep him. Like hopefully he pans out. I mean, most NBA players drafted in second round don't pan out. There's gonna be like Bobi Klintman Muse, who just like is super frustrated that the Pistons aren't getting the most of him. Like it's always going to happen. I think like giving the situation any more attention than we've already given it would be a sin. We will get to a point next season. Yes, he's inconsistent, but Tim Hardaway Jr. will make 6 threes in a game, and everyone will forget about Quentin Grimes. Like and he's on an expiring contract. That's the other thing is like you don't have to pay Quentin Grimes. You don't lose him for nothing. You get 3 second-round picks, which, as you mentioned, I believe the Thunder traded 5 second-round picks to jump up to 26 to get a guy they liked, and that's the Thunder. That's one of the smartest organizations in the league. So if the Pistons are doing things in the mold of these other smart organizations, if they do the other things like have a 5-out offense and get veterans on short-term deals. And like if they do all the things that other smart teams do, and that's what the Pistons seem to be doing right now, I don't understand how we live in a world where that's a bad thing. I think it's just Pistons fans, like they're younger, like, and I put myself into this as well. Like we haven't seen the Pistons be good, and now that they're doing good things, like it's incomprehensible that the Pistons are actually making smart decisions. Which, lastly, I don't understand because Trajan Langdon has only come off as eloquent, well-spoken, consistent, has a plan in place. He's done nothing to dissuade Tom Goris or any media member or fan that like this is a like too many cook situation or just like an aimless situation. Like I'm not gonna pick on Troy Weaver for the way that he speaks any longer, but like, but it was like infinitely more complicated and confusing for his entire tenure. And we have a GM or a president and a all-star front office who have only made it clear that they are going to do things that make sense and make sense only. Um, we live in a world where that's not good enough. And I think it's very much on the fans to just like, I'm the least patient person I know, but like even I can see how you need to be patient right now to see what's coming down the pipe.
Guys, Tim was very gracious with his time today. I know he's on a tight schedule and made some time to move some things around to be here today. So we're not going to take this any further because I know Tim has to go. I will say I'm going to do an extra solo edition podcast, another bonus episode. I can't promise an exact release. Hopefully Saturday morning it'll be out. But we're going to talk about a little bit more about this whole Trajan Langdon, Quinton Grimes thing. I think the reaction's just quite frankly insane. And I want to kind of dive into that a little bit more. Well, something we didn't get to talk about was free agency. And that starts on Sunday. So there's some stuff there that I want to talk about as we kind of preview that and look at the days ahead, the weeks ahead for the Detroit Pistons. And then I might even talk a little bit about Summer League because that's coming up soon. The Pistons
Oh no.
announced. And you know me, I'm a sicko. I'm going to start talking about their roster for Summer League and get into all of that. So stay tuned.
If you guys could see the pants that Aaron wears when he watches Summer League games, you would be astonished.
Whoa.
This is a life event, for Aaron.
Come on. So yeah, Tim, again, thanks for your time today. I appreciate everyone that tuned in. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you think of Ron Holland. I know we're going to get some talk about Quentin Grimes because that seems to be a bigger topic than Holland already. So cannot wait to see what everyone has to say. But that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. On behalf of myself, Aaron Johnson, and my co-host Tim Forkin, thanks so much for tuning in for another edition of the POP podcast brought to you by Believe. Thanks for again our sponsor, Bet Online. Use code Believe, BLEAV, for a 50% welcome bonus. No, new offer, a match of up to $250 in free bets. Go over and check them out as well. Thanks so much. We'll see you guys next week.